I'm going to be talking about a cheater who was caught using aimbot in an FPS game. Why am I talking about this? Well, first of all, I've been around FPS games for a while now. I've been a fan of Kovacs before Kovacs Aim Trainer came out, and that's because he made a lot of tutorials for a game called Reflex Arena, and because I play Quake and stuff like that, that was very useful to me. And so, like, when he was making his Aim Trainer, I was hyped because I was like, oh, finally, we're gonna get an aim trainer in which you can actually like throw projectiles and have your prediction aim also be counted into like training, something that is very difficult to train in actual games or even in aim trainers that were around that time. I think Aim Beast was around a bit earlier, and like a lot of browser games where you just click on 2D objects or OSU or whatever. Those weren't really good for projectile stuff like rockets, right, in Quake. So I've been around the AIM community for a while now. I've been kind of in the background. I just kind of like, occasionally look at what they're doing and stuff. But I would say I'm above average for most FPS games, I guess. Above average doesn't mean that I'm good, basically. My aim is above average, but not good. Without further ado, we found another one. Another cheater. So a month ago, there was a cheater who was notorious for cheating in Rocket League. This cheater was caught. His name is Shimmy in Rocket League, and it was a huge thing. He was basically like using macros and stuff. I can't remember what exactly he was doing, but it was a big thing. And then like I don't know, a year or so later, he comes to cheat again in FPS games, and he gets caught cheating again. History repeats itself, and now we have another cheater who posted Battlefield 6 gameplay, full-on rage cheating. Okay, so thankfully Twitter had enough, and even Tectone shunned this behavior among many other popular accounts. Just look at that insane ratio just getting destroyed on Twitter. After enough backlash, Twitch themselves banned Riley, our local cheater. Unfortunately, it seems that this cheater, Riley, got unbanned, likely due to the support of friends and people who are pro-LGBT, as this person is a trans woman. Okay, let's carefully analyze this clip and see how people caught the cheater.
That was so long ago.
And, yeah, it's pretty obvious, guys. Many users have pointed to this moment where Riley flicks quickly to a player behind a wall. With Riley's response afterwards, it's clearly an attempt to play it off as ironic.
Wow, I flicked straight at that guy through the wall. Oopsie.
Pretty shady indeed. One person in the replies breaks it down clearly, so I'll just read it for you. He says, "Disgusting cheater, just breaking the basics down. At 14 seconds, Riley locks on through the wall, shoots at the wall, relying on aimbot. And as we can see, the wall clip remains the most common and obvious example. It's just so blatant, right? At 22 seconds, we get the enemy being tracked so cleanly, smoothly on the vehicle. And it's just so, that's fishy, right? Normal people, when they track, it's a lot less robotic, a lot less smooth, I guess. At 29 seconds, it locks onto an enemy behind geometry, which I think this post is referring to this enemy, which is behind the rock. It's also kind of damning evidence because we have no indication as players, as viewers, that that enemy was there. At 54 seconds, the aimbot lags due to the enemy lagging. And so the aimbot looks stuttery. And this is quite interesting. I'm not sure how to feel about it, but it does make sense because you can see that the enemy is lagging right here. And so the aim does also lag behind it. At 59 seconds, locks onto the enemy through the bus, but not in view. However, you can see down allies. Cheater immediately resets. And here, we clearly see Riley do a 180 flick to the enemy laying down through the bus. It's just crazy. It's just, honestly, it's crazy. At 123, locks onto enemy immediately after killing an enemy that had no information shown. Immediately after ADSing, the enemy indicator appears, only it's after a cheater aimbot snapped and ADS'd. Yeah, I mean, like, how did Riley even see that alleyway guy? It's just you have to have, like, freaking eagle eyes or some shit, right? With a cat, cat night vision. But also cats are really good at sensing motion, so, but whatever, right? At 1 minute 34 seconds, locks onto the enemy behind the wall, immediately killing the visible enemy. And so it just keeps happening, just aiming at guys behind walls. Although in this case, Riley did see that enemy. It just speaks volumes that even after seeing that the enemy is behind a wall, you flick to that wall. It's just kind of, sus. Sus. At the very least, it's sus. At 142, you can see where the cheater is just ADSing while relying on aimbot that they use to ADS and start firing. So just look at this crazy flick right here. It's just, I don't know, man. You can't even see him, right? It's insane. So anyways, yeah, I think you should be entirely deplatformed from profiting off of cheats like this. It's just terrible bane into the gaming culture. So yeah, I personally, I totally agree. I expose many cheaters myself for the games that I play. Once a cheater, always a cheater. Riley eventually got banned, but then magically unbanned. You know, this is Twitch, you know. Twitch is known for letting a dear girl, like a literal dear girl, into their trust and safety council and unbans a trans woman with the pressure of friends and LGBTQ allies. Like, who could have expected this? It's, of course, right? Like, there's just no way Riley was playing legit. Right, guys? Okay, I was playing pretend the entire time. The reality is that there is not enough strong evidence to accuse this player of being a cheater. Let's examine more closely and judge what evidence is compelling or meaningless, and if it is even enough to outright accuse and cancel Riley. First, let's talk about players that are sometimes labeled as target switchers. This includes Riley. Target switching is a compilation of techniques that require quick flicks to a target followed by a small amount of tracking, with as little downtime between flicks as possible. This playstyle has been around for more than a decade now, but has become far more common in recent years as experience accumulates with older players, and as aim trainers make such playstyle less time-consuming. There are many players out there who I'd even argue are as good or better with greater credibility. This does not mean that anyone who is slightly worse than the top players are innocent. As we see, like Shimmy was far less impressive than some of the top players for FPSs, but was still cheating, right? So this only decreases the odds of cheating, but it's not a make or break. It's not like a smoking gun, right? It basically means that if you're worse than the best legit player, you're probably legit. The most damning piece of evidence that most people have pointed towards is when Riley shoots at an enemy behind a rocky hill. Here we see an insanely quick and long off-screen flick about 90 degrees. Off-screen flicks are relatively common among target switchers. Sound. Map indicators. All these clips are examples of me using the minimap. Here, there's a scan on the minimap, and it shows 3 people on the truck. You know, I'm aware that there's people there. As soon as the nade goes off, I click to that person because I thought I was getting shot, but it was just a nade. Here, again, the same thing. I even overflicked. Every single one of these kills is using the minimap. The first guy was pretty easy. The second guy, I was about to flick away, but then realized he was way too close with the exit. And the final one is on the objective, because of course. And here, I'm not seeing any enemy in the minimap, but I am seeing my teammates, and my teammates are huddled up together in this one area, which typically means that enemies are going to spawn on the opposite side of the map. So I flick to the area that people tend to come from, but in this other example, I am too busy killing one enemy that I forgot to flick to that area. Again, this is a very common area, so this is why you kind of have to watch that. Damage indicators. Here's the damage indicator showing me that somebody is behind me, but in fact there's nobody behind me, it's just a helicopter, but I did flick to where the damage indicator shows. The indicators that somebody is on an objective. Here I position myself to peek B and just in case, and then I hear it. I kill somebody on the hard point, but as you see, somebody is still capturing it. And I see my enemy on the opposite side of the map, and he must have a visual on somebody behind that van. So the only other possible part that this enemy could be is right behind this corner. This is a little risky because oftentimes you have bad teammates and you think that they were looking in an area, but in fact they were just doodling off or they didn't even see the guy as well camouflaged. Here, a teammate pings an enemy. I'm actually way too focused on it, and I end up missing the enemy nearby. This is also partly because a teammate indicator is really close to the enemy, so I just thought it was a teammate. Here I see the enemy's green laser. And here I notice the bullets killing my teammate. Flicking to common spots players take, and flicking at lines of sights that are openings like corners and doors, those are all things that people use to flick towards off screen. These are exaggerated examples of me looking at every angle and avenue that the enemy might have. This is something good to practice because you drill into your mind where an enemy can come from and makes you way more aware of those possibilities on your peripheral vision. It also makes you more comfortable flicking to those locations.
Too close. Enemy contact. Get to cover.
You can get good enough to where you can actually flick to those locations even through a smoke, which is something that CSGO players do all the time. My click timing and flicks are terrible, they're below average, and my tracking is above average. So somebody like Riley can definitely leverage something like this, because Riley is way better at flicking and click timing than I am. Here I kill somebody in the center of Rust, because I have seen this guy so many times in this match go up there, that I'm far more aware that he might be up there in my peripheral vision. Here I flick to the right and see somebody mid-flick off in the distance, but I rather focus on the people on the corner of the map, because they're more of an immediate danger. Unfortunately, I did not get the guy on the right, but this guy mid-flick is far easier to see at 144 Hz compared to the 60 FPS that you're watching it right now. Again, here I'm using my peripheral vision and even flick towards this person. It shows how even somebody like me with bad flicking technique can do this. In this next clip, I basically go and look at every single angle that the enemies are likely to be, and that works out nicely. And finally, I get this peripheral flick, and again, it's pretty good, despite my below average flicking ability. Here are more clips where I check different angles. I should note that I don't really focus on this playstyle. Half of the time I am interested in quickscoping, which is a completely different skill set. But more often than not, I'm playing games with a higher TTK, like Quake or Apex Legends, which require better tracking rather than target switching. And yet I'm able to do this. I see a stun go off, and so I assume that there might be an enemy there. Then I see my teammate fighting another enemy, and focus my attention to this little box. Here I flick to the left through the truck, which is a common spawn point, and as you can see I flick to him almost perfectly. Here I'm expecting somebody to come from behind me through this common choke point. Again, more choke points. I first aim at the kitchen, and then at a spawn point, and then back to the kitchen. Then I do an off-screen flick to the same area, because people tend to come from there, as you can see. And here, again, I fail, but again, very common area that you should gamble that flick to. In this example, the flick is done towards an enemy on the minimap. Or you could argue that is because there's somebody on that point as well, because usually, of course, if there's a point on the map, like let's say it's capture the flag or domination or whatever, what game you're playing, right? Usually you want to flick towards that area occasionally because players are bound to be there or be close to there, right? And it's just a key area of interest that you want to focus on when you're playing an FPS game. This is a common habit that most Call of Duty players use. Anyone who has played 1v1s on Rust knows that, and such habit transfers over to actual pubs and other games. So like, if you were playing Modern Warfare 2, right, and just 1v1 Rust, especially if you're like a sniper trying to improve your aim, one of the key things that players do is have the UAV on private matches always on, and this allows you to sort of train how to aim while using the minimap. This is super useful because snipers especially use this, as having to scope in for consistent accuracy is slow and opens you up to fire, which can throw off your aim, especially in the earlier Call of Duties. No scoping is not is not linear, especially in Modern Warfare 2. The bullet can go anywhere within like a crazy range, right? So it doesn't go straight. It only goes straight when you're aimed down sights. The worst part is that there's something called flinch. This is when you get shot or hit with something, and while you're aiming down sight, when you flinch, it means that your aim goes up really fast. This can throw off your aim, and it happens so fast that you really can't account for it. And it's a habit that a lot of players that come from Call of Duty integrate into even other games. This is also a habit that is commonly seen in tac shooters like Counter-Strike, Valorant, and Rainbow Six Siege, although they're done more practically. Common spots will be pre-aimed at before peeking out of a corner, often right at an enemy, as seen by pros of the game. And so, yeah, Counter-Strike players have been doing this for a long time, And I can guarantee you, if it weren't for, you know, tournaments, in-person tournaments, a lot of these players would be being accused of cheating. And granted, you can cheat in a tournament. It has happened before, but it's very uncommon, as people of the legendary word EXE will know. On top of this, there's a habit clip farmers for both Call of Duty snipers and target switchers do, which is to flick to an area where there is likely to be an enemy to continue the clip, even if you have not confirmed there to be an enemy. Most of the times this fails, but if you play for long enough, you will eventually land near a target. Now, to be fair, there is one thing that is suspicious, which is that after the main large flick, there's a micro flick that aims at around the area where an enemy would be. If we look at this gap right here between the leaves, it shows you how close that flick, that micro flick, was to the enemy's head. We cannot confirm exactly how close the crosshair was on target, as we see the enemy a few frames later when Riley peeks to the right. Riley and the enemy have moved a little since then, so the crosshair is not exactly on the enemy, but it could have been, right? We just don't know. Also, the crosshair still, even then, appears slightly above the enemy. It is suspicious. It's probably the most suspicious thing of this video. So I'll let you decide. But personally, I think it was mostly luck. Probably mostly luck. Obviously, you're trying to aim at areas where players tend to be, especially when the mini-map shows you that there's an enemy there. But I believe that enemy that first kills after peeking the hill is not actually the enemy we see on the mini-map as well. Like, I could be wrong. Again, we don't know for sure. It seems like the second enemy that Riley kills is the enemy that was on the mini-map. But again, we don't know because we don't have X-ray vision demos of this game like CSGO has or Quake has, you know. People also point out the other mini flick that is like a one-frame flick afterwards. Personally, I don't see this as significant. So a lot of people are saying that this is like way too fast of a flick for one frame. And my response to that is that it is so incredibly easy to flick really fast when the distance of that flick is so short. Usually, when somebody flicks, there's a little bit of shakiness right at the end of the flick to cause the crosshair to stop. Here, it stops completely. That can be explained by the style of aim that Riley is using. Sometimes we'll tense their arm at the end of a flick to make their flick stop. But sometimes they may lift up the mouse high enough to where the sensor isn't recognizing the mouse pad, and so the mouse thinks that it's not moving even though your hand is technically moving and the mouse is technically moving. This causes a very clean stop. It looks so robotic, so inhuman, but it is actually humanly possible to do that by lifting your mouse significantly off the mouse pad. Riley seems to be using both techniques. Seems to be using lifting up the mouse to stop a flick, but also sometimes tensing the arm so that it just stops quickly. Please just check this video regarding flicking techniques. I highly recommend it. I wish more videos were done of this nature because a lot of aiming videos, like how to get better aim, a lot of them are trash. I highly recommend you guys watch this video so that you can understand how deep aiming can get and how some people do the things that they do. It'll help you understand more of why I believe that this is probably a legit player. Let's talk about what happens at 22 seconds. This tracking is completely realistic. In fact, it's far more common, especially in games like Quake and Apex Legends, where the time to kill is far longer than in COD or Battlefield. Such aim has been seen in tournaments and is standard amongst pro players. Just look at players like Toxic or Sirius, or look at even some players in Apex Legends. Some of them got really good aim, but they came from Quake, such as this player. This is just something that is very common. I'm sorry, it's just very common in those games. In fact, a lot of these Quake players will do far more impressive feats of aim than what you see in this clip. And these people are completely legit. I mean, they've been in tournaments. Of course, you can cheat in a tournament, but it's far more unlikely because you have so many people watching you and stuff. If you play in a tournament, it's more likely than not that you're not cheating, right? At 29 seconds, Riley flicks to a general direction of this enemy, but is not even close to on target, especially vertically, because the enemy is like so far below the crosshair, right? Riley is seen injecting, which is the dumbest thing you can do if you had an aimbot or wall hack or UAV hack or whatever, especially when Riley had over 30 rounds left in the gun, and this enemy is about to peek you at close range. So unless Riley is cheating, but was trying to seem dumb in this case to blow off suspicion, this doesn't prove anything, right? So let's go to second 54. Okay, so this jittery track against a lagging enemy. Okay, I think only here do we see like a little jump in lag for that enemy, but it doesn't explain why the entire tracking was jittery. What better explains the jittery tracking is sometimes your wrist or arm has too much tension, especially if you get caught off guard or if you have nerves or whatever. Sometimes if you're really tired or just stopped working out or something, that there's many reasons why your tracking can be jittery. Like, this is why sometimes you will see the same player have really smooth tracking, and then other times the tracking is so jittery, because unpredictability can make your tracking jittery. If you are like uncertain or whatever, it's just, it's a lot of it is mental. Some of it is musculature. You could argue that if you work out your forearms really good, you probably will have like a smoother tracking. But like, look at this real quick. You can see that Riley eventually starts realizing, like at the end of the clip, that the enemy is moving in a continuous motion. So what happens is that Riley then assumes that enemy will continue going leftwards, and so Riley continues aiming leftwards. But then the enemy stops. But it takes a while for Riley to realize that the enemy stopped. So that's why the aim is actually not on track, and it looks pretty human. Basically, Riley overpredicted here. And this happens a lot, by the way. This is a issue that happens to players of all skill levels. There's not a single player out there that doesn't have this happen to them eventually. Doesn't matter how good you are, this will always happen. Your brain is geared to predict, and your brain wants to relegate as much conscious effort to things that are necessary as possible. Meaning that sometimes you'll be focusing on other things in the game, and so your brain will just predict your aim for you, basically. And it's kind of I'll argue prediction is necessary to aim. I'll probably make a video about this in the future concerning LG 1v1 duels in Quake. But long story short is that usually at a very low level, bad players tend to like make these long strafes. Sometimes they make these strafes because they don't see an enemy, they don't think that an enemy is looking at them, so they're just walking or running in a straight line. Decent players will short strafe. They'll like strafe left and right and left and right. They'll kind of vary up the length of the strafe, but it will still be generally kind of short strafes. And after a certain point, players who are good enough will be able to track that. It's still hard to track that, but eventually their brains are predicting that, oh, this player is more likely than not going to strafe for longer than X amount of seconds, so there's some leeway in how you're going to predict there. But sometimes players know that you're good, and they will long strafe instead, doing the thing that you don't think will happen. And this can throw people off, right? This is why some people have like very jittery aim when tracking, because, you know, sometimes the enemy just did not behave the way you thought they would. At 59 seconds, the crosshair lands above and significantly to the left of the enemy lying in the bus. Again, such flick could be due to things that aren't cheats, such as going to the bus for cover. I mean, this is just a classic 180 flick. It's just, you know, you just want to go back, right? Or because his teammate needed to be revived, and if you just look at that general direction, you might find the person who knocked him down. At 1 minute 23 seconds, you can see a third enemy, while the second enemy is still being killed. So this is fairly hard, right, to do. But once you start feeling comfortable with your aim, you can focus on things more than just the enemy that you're shooting at. It's a very hard thing to learn, and it takes a lot, you know, it takes a lot of like, you need to first of all be de-rusted, you need to be like warmed up. You have to feel that mind-muscle connection. This is fairly common. The enemy doesn't seem very obviously visible, but I'm pretty sure without the Twitter artifacting the video, you know, the low bit rate, the limited 60 FPS, in Riley's actual gaming screen, it's probably far easier to see this enemy than what you see in the video on Twitter. At 1 minute 34 seconds, the aim is directed at the wall. However, Riley already saw this enemy and may have thought that the bullets will go through the wall. Bullets piercing through walls, shooting at enemies through walls is very common in many FPS games like Call of Duty, CSGO, so on and so forth. It could also be that Riley missed a flick, so Riley may have wanted to flick towards the corner so that the enemy runs into Riley's fire, but Riley may have overflicked and flicked at the wall instead of like that corner. I don't know if this is more likely. I don't think that's likely. I think that Riley thought that the bullets will pierce through the wall. I don't know. Perhaps Riley thought the enemy died and flicked to the third enemy, which is a common issue amongst target switchers, even in Kovacs scenarios. So what happens is that, like, if you're practicing target switching in Kovacs, you aim at one target and you visually confirmed when you kill that target so that you can snap onto the other target. However, as you get better, as you try to like improve your score, you're not going to visually confirm whether or not you killed an enemy. You're just going to assume that after a certain amount of shots, the enemy will die. And so they're not visually confirming it anymore. They just assume that the enemy will die after X amount of bullets, X amount of milliseconds or whatever. And so sometimes people will accidentally like flick prematurely away from the enemy that they were killing. So they end up not killing the first enemy, but they flick to the second enemy. And this can happen for many reasons. Maybe you're not skilled or familiar enough with the gun damage. Maybe you shot the enemy in the arm once or in the leg, which causes less damage, and so you only need one bullet left to kill the enemy, but you didn't kill him. So this is fairly normal to see, actually. It happens at all skill levels. So also, people claim that the flick into the alleyway is suspicious, but you can see this enemy go into the alleyway before the flick. This is also an area you would try to take note of because it is a common choke point. To be fair here, the enemy is hard to see. And while he may be far easier to spot in-game with bitrate and frame rate not being an issue, because again, what we're seeing is a Twitter compressed video, and it's compressed pretty bad. Twitter compression is terrible. At a limited frame rate, which is 60 FPS, versus Riley's like 190 FPS at in-game. It might not be an issue, especially when, you don't know how far away Riley is from the monitor. The monitor could be less than a foot away, or maybe even like a big-ass monitor. Who knows? We don't know. But that's something that I learned when watching people play CSGO. I used to think, how did you see that little head peeking off from the alleyway in Rust 2? In CSGO. The head is almost the size of the crosshair, less than the size of the crosshair, like maybe 4 pixels in diameter. I didn't understand how people can see those targets until I saw pros play the game, and some of these players have they're probably one nose from their monitor. It's just like I can't believe anybody plays like this. So we don't know how close Riley is to the monitor, but being that close to the monitor makes things way easier to spot than you think. Still, though, it's kind of a crazy amount of eyesight and decision making, especially when I would have been distracted by the enemy to the left of the wall, the one that Riley did not kill. On the other hand, I am behind cover from that leftward enemy because of that wall, so I could just ignore that enemy until I see that enemy peek. It is crazy good decision making and eyesight. It could be hacks, of course, but it could also just be like actual genuine like skill, game sense, whatever you want to call it. Also, it's a dark alleyway. You can barely see the enemy, but again, not only is Riley seeing something way better than what we see in this compressed video, but motion is so important. Motion is what we use oftentimes to spot a player in games like Call of Duty. Call of Duty, especially like some older Call of Duties, the enemies are so hidden. They mesh well, they camouflage well, but one of the best ways is to just simply notice any movement, and that usually does the trick. Again, like cats. I can't remember if it's cats or flies, but one of them has terrible eyesight. The detail on their eyesight is terrible, but they have really good motion sensing. It's kind of similar for us humans. At 142, we can see the enemy well before the flick in ADS. Admittedly, this target is hard to spot, mainly because not only is it small, but it's barely moving. And again, the motion also helps you find a target. But again, Riley, you don't know how good the quality is in Riley's monitor compared to like the Twitter frame rate and stuff. This is why I don't think that this long tweet actually did a great breakdown of why Riley is cheating. A lot of this evidence is very circumstantial. Okay, let's take a look at other evidence presented. First, we had arguments saying that Twitch banned Riley, therefore cheats were used. This is not a good argument because we do not know the exact methodology and the evidence that Twitch had. We can only trust that they were correct, but that's obviously not enough. In this case, it was most likely than not due to mass reporting that Twitch banned Riley. So basically, people basically canceled Riley. And then when Riley got unbanned, people claimed that this was due to an LGBTQ bias. No, let's not, ignore the obvious, which is that Twitch definitely has a bias. We've consistently seen people show their privates, show their dogs, break many other terms of service, yet those people get reinstated and have the most meaningless slap on the wrist possible. The reasons for this are very likely that some of these people got unbanned because they're actually useful assets to Twitch. They're very popular, they keep the site more or less alive. And then there's other instances where it gets more conspiratorial, but I do believe this happens, which is that someone on Twitch, a moderator or something, has like a personal relationship with somebody. It could be platonic or romantic, whatever it is, and they'll play favors, right? We're also seeing Twitch have a heavy left-wing bias for certain things. So, for example, we saw the Trust and Safety Council with a so-called Dear Girl. This Dear Girl is like also kind of got canceled, but understandably so, because just some crazy, insane far-left beliefs, and other people in the council were similar. And if you think about it, it just just very Orwellian to just be like, oh, this is a trust and safety council. Like, what are you protecting people from, right? There's no danger using Twitch besides maybe swatting or, taking advantage of minors on the site. This unban is most likely to not explained by Twitch, the Twitch team realizing that there's no concrete evidence that Riley is cheating. But I just want people to notice the contradiction here. The side that trusted Twitch when it was a ban, all of a sudden distrusts Twitch when it was unbanned, due to the politics of Twitch. We'll cover more about this later. Another argument is that the handcam supply does not match with the gameplay. Part of the reason this is the case is that handcams in games usually run and are recorded at different frame rates, causing certain desynchronizations. The other is that there can be a delay between different video sources, usually having the handcam be a few frames ahead of the gameplay footage. I personally had this happen. It can be fixed by either adding a delay to the faster video source or editing in post. On top of this, some players will create abrupt and almost inhuman stops to flicks in games by lifting up their mouse. We already explained this. If people lift up their mouse, you'll still see their hand moving a little bit, even though in game the crosshair is still. So that could also explain it. And because Riley seems to have a high sensitivity and seems to be mostly wrist player, you'll notice Riley has the wrist planted stationary on the mouse pad, and so that would mean that Riley has to pick up the mouse repeatedly to reset the positioning of the hand, because you eventually run out of like range of motion. So this happens even with arm aimers, and so this could explain Riley will sometimes tense up the hand to stop a flick, or sometimes raise the hand to stop a flick. Oftentimes the raising of the hand is probably just meant to reset the mouse. And yeah, I just think that this is a soft piece of evidence. Such handcam footage would have to be synced in the video editor, account for frame rate discrepancies. So sometimes, let's say you're rendering a video at 30 FPS, but the native raw footage is like 24 FPS. I'm just gonna make up a number. For every 24 frames, there's gonna be like 2 or 3 repeated frames, and you're just gonna see this pattern again and again and again. It depends on how it's recorded as well, because well, that's technical. I don't even know if I'm correct, but basically some footage is recorded at a constant frame rate, and some footage will be recorded at kind of a variable frame rate. So this is not foolproof, but if you start seeing like every X amount of frames, a frame repeats, it's probably just a frame rate thing. You would basically have to sync it in a video editor, account for the frame rate discrepancies, account for the instances that the mouse is lifted, and then analyze everything frame by frame to see if there's any suspicious finding. This will take a lot of work. If anyone does this analysis, we can actually debate about those instances which seem to be cheating. But for now, most people seem to just be pointing at things generally. They don't actually point at what point in time this desync happens in the footage. You'd have to, again, analyze everything frame by frame, more or less. It's exhausting work, but it is possible. Also, here we have a former cheat developer claim that it is likely an aim simulator that was used, where a target gets locked onto if it is within 2 to 4 FOV of the crosshair. And he claims that this will likely be an external program. I'm assuming that by external, he means, I don't know, loading on the mouse itself or loading on a USB drive, I don't know. However, without any proper analysis, measuring and displaying this lock-on range on the footage, these are unsubstantiated claims. Well, obviously, if you're a former cheat developer, that adds credence. This is not enough alone. Claiming otherwise is an appeal to authority, a fallacy that would just not pass in any formal field. And people who are just using appeal to authority by saying like, oh hey, this guy is a former cheat developer, so it must be true. Why aren't you doing the same thing for professional players who are defending Riley? People who have really good aim and just really good FPS skills in general. The cheat developer isn't a good FPS player, and the good FPS player isn't a cheat developer. So just because you are a cook and have passed cooking class or whatever doesn't mean that sometimes you will mess up with your cooking, and that doesn't mean that the customer that calls you out on it is wrong. Sometimes people who are authorities on a subject are wrong. Another argument is, why wouldn't Riley sign up to become a professional with such a skill set? And this is kind of a poor argument, but it's also somewhat understandable. So when I talk about this, some of these arguments that I'm disputing are ignorant, but they're not malicious, right? So I'm not trying to be offensive when I target some of these arguments. Some of them, yeah, some of them I think are just really dumb, like the LGBTQ bias. But in this case, it's completely understandable from an outsider or from someone who is a bit more casual. So again, I'm not trying to be mean or anything here. I'm just being frank. Firstly, Aim is just one of many skills needed to become professional FPS players. Map knowledge, game sense, strategies, prediction, communication, and more play huge roles in FPS games at a high level. We've seen plenty of great aimers just get humbled in pro games, as well as aimbotters just get destroyed by pro players. I myself, one of my favorite things to do is sometimes just watch a hacker get destroyed on YouTube. I recommend you watch this video where like the best quick player of all time, basically Rafa, just destroys this aimbotter, and this one by Pomaj, who destroys this cheater by avoiding this cheater in particular and killing other players in the game at a faster rate to win this free fall. There is such a thing as all aim, no brain. I guess I have none of those, but feel free to watch this video on how even insane Siege players look like they're hacking, but they often get beat by people who have more practical human-looking aim. And these insane like Siege aimers are actual legit players. Secondly, not everyone wants to go pro. Some people enjoy getting clips, whether it is because of their aim or their mechanics. We see this in so many games like Apex Legends, where the best movement players are not pros, and the best pros are nowhere near as good as movement as some of these movement players. You can optimize your playstyle for pro games, or optimize your playstyle for pubs. Both extremes play differently, and is one example as to why high-ranked players in games like Counter-Strike get annoyed by playing with low-ranked players. Basically, high-ranked players optimize their playstyle to deal with smarter and more skilled players. So they'll have to have some time adjustment when playing against lower ranks because of how unpredictable those ranks are. A lot of these people will make probabilistically bad decisions. You know, some people might take for granted that no one will push through the smoke, but some people who are very new will push through a smoke a lot more than is safe. Doesn't only push through it once, but pushes through it like every round. The first few times you will get caught off guard because you're just thinking like, why would anyone do that? But of course, you will eventually adapt. High-ranked players have optimized their playstyle to deal with smarter and more skilled players. Some people just like to do this as a hobby. Some people like to play it as an actual job. So now let's look at other videos with more interesting evidence. This video is by 10IQ, and he has a few pieces of evidence to analyze. He says that Riley got banned before for 7 days. We see the tweet. This is also suspicious, but again, we do not know for certain on what basis Twitch made this ban or whether or not Riley got unbanned. Second piece of evidence is hidden streams. This is suspicious, but the real problem is that Riley is using a crosshair overlay program. Yet in the newer streams, you cannot find this crosshair. While this can be reasonably considered cheating, it is not the type of cheat that Riley is getting accused of. Riley is getting accused of aimbot / UAV / wall hacks. You know, your crosshair is not gonna make you play anywhere near as good just by having this crosshair. On top of that, such a cheat is relatively meaningless. While it helps, one can easily draw a dot on the center of their monitor or use a crosshair preset that is often integrated with monitors themselves. He suggests that a player of Riley's caliber does not need a crosshair, but I'd argue that a player of any skill needs one, but can mostly play well without them 90% of the time. We see this with Quake Live, where playing without a crosshair is easy to adjust to, but there's gonna be situations in which you wish you had one, especially at longer range encounters where the enemy or target is very small. In Battlefield, it can be a significant advantage as sometimes the weapon's sight do not align perfectly at the center during the player's movement and reactions. Still, I think Riley should own up to this for transparency's sakes, but let's be real, man. It's not a big issue. Again, you can just draw a dot on your screen, and it's not gonna make you play as good as Riley. Also, as an update, it seems like these VODs that Riley privated are back up. The only VODs being unpublished are the ones after the cheating accusation, so I don't really consider those VODs particularly meaningful. Transparency is key and benefits players who aren't cheating. And so I recommend anyone who gets accused of cheating, just show everything. Show everything. And obviously it's incredibly damning if you hide some of that. It does not necessarily mean that you are cheating if you're hiding that, but more likely than not it is. But obviously when this first happened, that made me raise an eyebrow because it's, you know, why would you hide those VODs, right? It's just kind of dumb. Don't do that. Never do that, guys. Again, never do that. If you're legit, never do that. Here, 10IQ claims that Riley has a Team Fortress and Apex executables, despite it not being installed. His evidence is that he doesn't see the game file on the Documents tab. This is not correct because not all installations go towards one's document folder, nor do the save files and other configurations. On top of this, he has suspicions about the name of the Apex executable. I know what this executable is. This is R5 Apex. It is actually a modified standalone version of the game with its own servers. It is often used to practice with 1v1s with other players on the same launcher if they're using the same launcher. Explore map stuff, learn movement techniques more efficiently, make cinematics, etc. I myself use it, and I highly recommend it if you're extremely into Apex. As such, there's no strong reason to believe this is a cheat. I mean, maybe it isn't the exact executable and it's just named after this modified version of the game. But this modified version of the game is completely legit. I have it installed on my machine right now with Apex, like the real Apex, and I haven't really used it in ages, but I highly recommend you guys check out what it is. It's not actually affecting your actual real Apex. This is just a launcher that you can play with people who use the launcher. You can't play actual Apex servers with this launcher. As far as I know, it's fine. This next piece of evidence is also suspicious because Riley just quickly closes the file without showing it all.
It should be in here somewhere. It's a very long list, so good luck.
Holy hell, Riley. What was the rush of trying to get
Again,
out
this is suspicious, and Riley should have been way more transparent here. Why would you have such haste in alt-tabbing to the game? I just don't get it, so it is kind of fishy. The tabs on the notepad is the next piece of evidence. Personally, my notepad can't do this, but it is understandable to see an FPS enthusiast just have a lot of different modifications of their config files. I do this often, especially when I want to make certain games run more efficiently, like Modern Warfare 3, or the fine-tuning of certain options, like the FOV and sensitivity that aren't easily available in-game, like Apex Legends FOV. So actually, you can't go over 110 FOV in Apex Legends using the in-game slider. You have to go into the config file, which is completely legit. You can actually do this. Set the FOV to a bit higher. You can't actually make it go higher than 120, I think. Personally, I just use it to get the exact number that I want for the FOV. Of course, a cheater will make use of such CFG. Just because people use this to modify the game in a legit way doesn't mean that there aren't people out there who are also using it nefariously, and vice versa. Perhaps the biggest piece of suspicious behavior is presented here. Riley allegedly has multiple Steam accounts. He will make multiple accounts to sell them later or to smurf so that they can play ranked games with lower ranked friends. However, this many alt accounts is a bit suspicious. This is something you often see with prolific cheaters. I would like to see how 10IQ is sure that these are Riley's accounts, but on the surface it is suspicious. So like that's another good piece of soft evidence against Riley. There's also this analysis. The main issue he has is with the noobish crosshair placement, yet having really good aim. This is a fair critique, but also circumstantial. I play casually multiple different FPS games, and I tend to be focused on crosshair placement when it comes to games like tac shooters, such as Valorant. But my crosshair placement becomes terrible at other games like Quake Live because I don't need to really focus on it on much. As well as the fact that Quake Live, there's a lot more verticality in it, so it's not horizontal the entire way through like a game like Valorant or CS:GO. Since the TTK is so low and not biased towards really small heads like it is in tac shooters, and because the pace is far faster, having poor crosshair placement is forgivable in a game like COD or Battlefield, especially when you go up the stairs. So this is not something that most people really care about, even if they're good at Call of Duty. They'll mostly just flick to, again, common corridors and stuff like that. They're not really, like, obsessing over crosshair placement. In summary, I don't believe that Riley is cheating. This does not necessarily mean that Riley is not cheating, but that there is not enough reason to assert cheating has taken place. Just like some people can get let free after a case against them is thrown out, but later found out that they are guilty with more evidence, the same thing applies here. Maybe in the future Riley does slip up and there is indeed a cheat installed. The point is that evidence right now is lacking. As we dissected, most of the evidence is circumstantial at best. Think of it logically like a court case. Without a smoking gun like CCTV footage of a man shooting another person with his face clearly visible on screen, the best we can do is rely on circumstantial evidence, such as matching the fingerprints, the footprints of the crime scene to suspect sneakers, which could easily be worn by other people. It could be a common sneaker that the actual shooter was using too. Or seeing the bullets and matching it to the suspect's bullets at his drawers, which could also be a common bullet type used by the actual shooter. However, it requires a lot of circumstantial evidence to be confident that a suspect is responsible. Not just a handful of evidence, which is basically what we're seeing right now. Unfortunately, it is difficult to be 100% certain about any player. As time goes on, players improve, but also cheats and their stealth improve. Some cheaters will probably never be caught, and I guarantee every community has a renowned player that is currently cheating. Someone who is relegating a legitimate player to the background and basically ruining their livelihood and legacy, right? So if you cheat, you're basically stealing the spotlight off of somebody who's actually good. But here, such evidence is not enough to say with confidence that Riley is cheating, and would not be taken seriously for other games, especially tech shooters. I know when I first started playing Counter-Strike, everyone seemed like cheaters until I understood that aiming at common spots and corners before peeking is not only a learnable skill, but also very common. That there are areas where an enemy is most likely to peek from, and that you can heavily rely on your minimap to aim at targets that are not even on your screen. If you are new to FPS games, all of this seems understandably like cheating. But many of the players making these accusations are old enough and have enough FPS experience to have no excuse. As I mentioned, this style of aim has been around for a long time, with crazier styles of aim like the ones you see from Counter-Strike and Quick Live being around for longer. You have seen the hacker-like aim and reactions from pros in in-person tournaments. There's no excuse for people making such accusations, and I strongly believe that a large part of the hate is due to politics. This brings us to the last section of this video, which is that much of this hate is due to the culture war nonsense. The majority of people on the quote retweets are right-wing, conservatives, or make apologetics for the right. Shimmy, the cheater caught a month ago, made waves not only because he was cheating in FPS games, not only was he faking his scores in aim trainers, not only was he selling courses despite his entire authority being based on lies, but has also cheated in a major way with Rocket League in the past. In other words, he's already notorious, yet he did not go as viral as Riley did. Of course, the anticipation of Battlefield 6 helped, but I firmly believe much of this is due to Riley being a trans woman. It is the element that consistently gets mocked by profiles with clear right-wing biases. I mean, look at how they claim the unban is due to the LGBT bias with zero evidence behind it. It couldn't possibly be that the evidence is weak, right? From Asmongold slowly grinding away into the political grift with Tectone following in his footsteps, to big Twitter accounts that have similar politics, it is a pattern hard to ignore. And this dude Tectone has the audacity to talk about unemployment while having zero talent and being given hundreds of thousands of dollars so that he can bet the money away on the lowest form of gaming, called gacha games. You are living proof that we do not live in a meritocracy. Meanwhile, somebody relatively unknown like Riley is far beyond your skill level, yet makes some change. If streaming wasn't real, you'd be tweezing out my butt hairs at a minimum wage spa. And what's crazy is that I agree with this degenerate on some controversial issues, but that does not stop me from calling him a retard on this topic. You can say that Riley punched low, but I'll say Tectone punched down at the wrong motherfucker first. Look at this dude standing behind Billy Mitchell, who seems trigger happy on suing people, even suing Cartoon Network for alleging that they used his likeness and has been accused of cheating multiple times in the past. Some of these people are just obvious bigots. I must emphasize the word some. Some people are genuinely skeptical and aren't motivated by culture wars. Some of the people we shown here do not care that Riley is a trans woman. And yes, there are some left-leaning and LGBT people accusing Riley of cheating, but they are far outnumbered. For example, this idiot is trying to cancel someone for using different pronouns, only to get canceled back. Like, please guys, just please, just grow the fuck up. Please. Of course, someone will accidentally slip up and refer to Riley as a man when you hear a male voice behind the mic. Even if she knew Riley was trans, it is still childish to cancel someone and force them to speak in a way they don't agree with. Or this one who genuinely believes that this whole debacle is rooted on misogyny. I just swear, bro, you just cannot escape stupid in this world. All that aside, this is actually one of the few times I agree with the LGBT community for yelling transphobia. At least at the start. As this issue has gone more mainstream, people who aren't ideologically motivated started accusing this player of cheats, which at least is better than the initial hate Riley got. This video was made largely because of how much I hate the state of gaming. Tons of so-called gamers that should know better, showing off how unbelievably scrubby they are. This does not surprise me, as I come from communities that constantly deals with shit from casuals. Just look at how badly Riley got ratioed. It is a prime example of how the majority of people can be wrong, in part due to herd mentality. Based on this guy's flippin' hypothetical, killing people in a row would get your control to explode. Because of course, he knows how to play these games. On top of being politically brain dead, you're also all shit at video games, and call other people cheaters that even my old teenage self would defend. Look at how they hype up somebody destroying a lobby with a defib while trashing Riley's aim. It's cool, takes skill, and is unique, but pales in comparison to what other players like Riley are doing. It takes far more practice to do what Riley does, whereas melee-only clips are more accessible, having analogs in other games like MW2 knife-only players. It's like ogling at a player nailing a note stream on Osu while trashing a low AR player, despite it arguably being harder in general. Or thinking that tremolo picking on guitar is the best thing in the world while neglecting slower but more complex and difficult feats. This type of person uses humor as a tool to be flippant and avoid actually engaging in good faith. Humor is the easiest tool to avoid looking stupid when your argument falls flat, while gaining legions of idiots to agree with you just because you made them laugh. It shows a lack of curiosity and spine. I despise both the far left and far right, nor am I a yes man for the LGBTQ community. I've been flamed by plenty of them, and have even been accused of transphobia or whatever other buzzword they have. I made a video about this before where somebody called me homophobic for hating the progress flag. And yet I am defending someone who would probably cancel me based on my political and social beliefs, and so will most of the LGBT community. I do not care. On this issue, I agree even with trash bags like Ender who actively canceled somebody for calling him names. I don't like some of these people. That doesn't mean they're always wrong. I don't hold political bias for this person, and even if I was a yes man, I wouldn't excuse a cheater if true. I have exposed cheaters myself in games like DMC, and have gladly shat on them relentlessly. And if there's no doubt that Riley CS is cheating, I would also do the same. Once a cheater, always a cheater. I firmly believe this, and I think that cheaters in general shouldn't be trusted and should be outcasted from society. I know that sounds a little bit rough, but history repeats itself, and if you're willing to lie just for clout and adoration or whatever, you're not a good person in my book. If you think I'm somehow playing politics for the LGBT community, you will be thoroughly laughed at by anyone who's known me for a very long time. Like this kid who thinks that I have some fetish, when in reality he's probably just projecting. I'm my own person and will gladly piss off everyone in the world if it means standing by my values. And I probably already did that with this video. Grow the fuck up and actually be good faith for once, and not deep fry your brain with simple extremist politics. And my condolences to Riley, the few sane right-wing conservative voices remaining, and those engaging in good faith. Also, SMD Dingo. Hello guys, this is me post-edit. So, the video is basically over, but if you want to know why I made this video and all that, then you can listen to this. But, if you don't, that's neither here nor there. This is not going to be as scripted as beforehand, but it's still going to be, like, some bullet points. So I apologize for any, like, bad, commentary quality. But yeah, I basically wrote, recorded, and edited over half of this video in the first month of the drama happening. But unfortunately, I got lazy. Among other things, I mean, quite frankly, I don't get paid for this, and this is not like a passion project, so of course I'm gonna get lazy. Of course I'm not gonna be like on time, on topic all the time, right? I'm just gonna do what I like. And so I got lazy, but also the other shit is that like people who are making reactionary content about this, they just hop in, record their commentary unscripted, and say whatever the fuck, and they just like don't even really fact check or double think the things that they said. Like, they're not being very charitable sometimes. Basically, they're just destroying a building, and it takes more effort to create a building than it is to destroy it. And in this case, it takes more effort for me to actually do my research, make sure I'm treating these people's points fairly and like considering them and seeing if it makes sense or not, considering all the possible options and arguments. And also the editing process is difficult because like I'm trying to also teach people, help people learn something from this video. And sometimes I'll say something and I'll try to find a clip that matches what I'm saying, and I have to go search for that clip. Maybe I remember like a video from a few months ago, and then I go on YouTube, search for that video, but I don't remember the video's name. I just remember who is doing it or whatever. And I have to go through a bunch of videos, and then within each video, I have to find the exact clip that I want until I finally find it. And, for that 10-second clip, it took me like half an hour to find. And there's many 10-second clips in my videos. So that kind of is a pain in the ass. It's very boring. It's very tedious stuff. And it's easy to get distracted because sometimes you're like, oh, look at this video, and whatever. So that's why, it just takes effort, right? It just takes way more effort than some freaking grifter just getting on the mic and saying like, oh, Riley's cheating because XYZ, and like sometimes they make good points, right? But most people are just fucking lazy and do whatever, man. So that's why I kind of didn't want to even do this video because it takes effort. The other issue is that like, obviously for such a politically charged like drama that I needed to talk about, I'm also gonna make enemies, and even though I'm a fairly disagreeable person and like to argue a lot, it's not always great to have a lot of enemies. And I'll do it anyways, of course, but it's just kind of annoying because for a fact that somebody will take you out of context or like strawman the shit out of you Like I'll say like I don't like apples, and then somebody will say, "Oh, you also don't like oranges, bro?" Like I didn't say that. Like chill. Um, the other thing too is that like I these are hobbies, right, for me, and so I try to learn from everybody, no matter who it is, no matter if I hate them or not. I try to learn from everybody, and the problem with that is that if you're making enemies, it's hard to learn from people because some people might block you, some people might like prevent you from joining a Discord server. Some people will like not answer your questions or like treat you like shit, and you can't actually learn from people. Like there have been many times, for example, that I would retweet people's stuff, try to share them because I used to be somebody in the community for the games that I played, not much anymore. But um, yeah, I would try to share people's stuff, make sure that they get some attention as up and coming players, and then like several months down the line, I discovered that they just hate my guts because of something that I said, but they were just too cowardly to confront me about it, or they were just too arrogant to just say like, "Hey, I disagree with you on this. Let's talk about it." Instead, they would just be like, "Oh, this guy's definitely wrong," so I won't even address him. A few months later, I was like, "Oh, this person actually hates my guts, and I'm just there helping them grow their channel or whatever." That's why I don't do that anymore, by the way. But um, yeah. Also, the other issue too is that other people have already made videos on this topic, and they made them very well. So I was like, why upload a video? But even then, I just realized first of all that just because other people have made topics, they made good videos on this topic and made similar, or if not exact points that I'm making right now. It is still good to have more people talk about this in the correct way. Because you spread the word of mouth more. You make it more obvious. Explain things in a different way, but still have the same conclusion, so that more people learn. Right, more people will end up realizing that hey, the Riley may or may not be cheating, but there's not good evidence right now for that. And so I think it's good to make that sort of stuff. Also, I made this video because, like, I'm scratching that itch, right? So if somebody says something wrong, I kind of have this itch to talk about it. So recently, I made a poll, and people voted that yeah, I should probably still upload this video, and so I will, and so I am. Also, another thing is that like not many people talked about the political aspect of this, and I think it is important because it is a big part of why Riley got canceled. It's kind of obvious why not many people talk about the political aspect of the video. You're not gonna get a lot of friends talking about politics, all right? Um, in fact, if anything, I think people like let's say online people, they tend to get the most shit if they're talking about politics. Um, I think that political haters are the worst. You can't even get like somebody who hates you for like playing bad at soccer, nowhere near as bad as being like a political commentator. You'll probably hear like some of the worst experiences from political commentators about how strong their haters are. So I can understand why people didn't talk about it, but I think that gave me motivation to make this video because I'm gonna be one of the few people that talk about it. And what better person to handle it from somebody who is not woke, not an LGBT ally, quote unquote, not have any personal close friends with the AIM community or ties to the AIM community, right? Like I'm just around the AIM community. I don't actually have like friendships or anything with anybody in the AIM community. So like if somebody were to say that, oh, you're defending them because you're their friend, or you're defending them because you're woke, or you're defending them because you're an LGBTQ ally, like that doesn't apply to me, right? They can fuck off. So that's why I think it was a good idea for me to do this because most other people will probably have a bias about this. And don't get me wrong, everyone's biased. I'm probably having some biases for Riley, but I can defend my biases if at all, if I have any, with these arguments. So uh, the other issue is that people people are still talking about this, right? It's not like this turned over. Like people are still talking about Riley. People are still commenting about how Riley is cheating or like Riley is trans. Like there's this constant. I can't even say it because it's a meme that has has a word that I can't say on YouTube at least. Um, but people will post like some heinous shit about Riley, and So even though this video is late, if somebody says, "Oh my god, what are you posting? This happened like half a year ago," it's like, yeah, but it's still continuing, right? It's still a problem. Um, More than that is that I've seen a bigger pattern of scrubbiness because of this. Like for some reason, I see more people like trashing on the AIM community and like making these really dumb points and going into people's videos, and like this is something that I haven't seen as much in the past. There's more like haters on people's like AIM videos, and it's like, whoa, what's up? Like, so ever since the drama occurred, just I see a higher pattern of people just talking shit on random people's videos because, oh, you look like you use aimbot, blah blah blah, or like, oh, you play like a Call of Duty player, oh, you like fucking move like a Call of Duty player or whatever, and it's just like, dude, like what? Like there's this kind of like anti like getting good sentiment around that I haven't really experienced as much in the past, but just general like the general popular players, or not the general like FPS community. Whereas beforehand, these people wouldn't talk as much, right? And now they're just talking about it all the time. So there's definitely a pattern of scrubbiness that has developed ever since this happened. Um, I've seen people talk shit to people who are actually, qualified to talk about this, like Viscos, like Pinglify, hell, even Optimum Tech. Like Optimum Tech is like a reviewer. Um, but I loved his videos ever since he had like a few thousand subscribers because he actually played these games pretty well. He had pretty good aim and whatnot. And as he mentions in his video, he doesn't really associate too much with the AIM community because he's not, he's just a reviewer, but he's really good at what he does, and he actually cares about getting good aim. He's not a pro, but he's an enthusiast, right? And even he's getting like pushback, and this is why I decided to make this video because it's like, what the hell is going on? Why are these people getting mass disliked, yet at the same time cannot make their argument, right? You just they dislike, and you look at the comments, and nobody's making an argument. And when they do get an argument going, like they just get rolled. Um, so yeah, I also highly recommend Carl Jobs' second video. He covers what's his name? He covers Call of Shame, and even I kind of like assumed the Call of Shame was somebody who was really reputable, but after Carl Jobs' second video, I don't know if I can say that anymore. I suggest you guys watch it. It's definitely a unique video on the topic. Um, but yeah, this is basically, why I made this video. So thanks for watching, guys.